I do take a very psychological approach to AI, so I'm also going to summarize a lot of what you heard tonight into a much higher level. So hopefully it helps you digest it a little bit more, and also maybe takes it more to an artistic level. As a VP of product, I'm sure you guys probably are aware of what the position does, but I get to work with absolutely everybody. I work with designers, I work with the technical staff, I work with UX, I work with deployment, everything. It is very, very fun. Also very, very challenging, especially when we're working with AI. As Andy mentioned, I came from Massachusetts about 10 years ago, and in Massachusetts I worked for some big companies and came over here to do big company consulting for Deloitte. And after the bottom dropped out in 2008, 2009, I went off on my own. But while I was at Deloitte 10 years ago, I started studying AI. I noticed that there was a change coming. If you guys might have noticed, the media really just started talking about AI very recently. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to call it the old way and the new way. And the old way and the new way, one is not better than the other, they're just different. And I'll explain what that means as I go along. We've heard about the different types of AI. I'm going to make it a little bit higher level for you so that you can see how it kind of like decomposes into smaller groups of AI. I talk about applications as a separate definition from what a use case is, so that you can kind of like understand like where AI is being put into place and how businesses are actually using it. I have my own personal considerations when I'm working with the designers of AI and robotics, and I'll go into that a little bit. And then I got a public service announcement for you about not fearing Skynet. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the old way and new way, thinking about AI. So when you're dealing with AI, what you're dealing with is this kind of like problem of knowing where you have all of your knowledge. You have all this knowledge laid out and understanding, and both of them are, when you use an AI, they're both, the techniques that you can use to get to both of these are very, very different. Knowing is very reductive, and when you heard the previous speakers talking about breaking things down into discrete things and everything like that, that allows us to take a very, very complex subject and make it smaller so that we can, as human beings, understand it a lot more. If we had everything flying at us at once, it would kind of drive us nuts. So then the understanding part of things is more constructive. Like you heard about reinforcement learning, where things are really where things come upward more than they do downward. So when you're dealing with a reductive system, the kind of things that you're dealing with are command, where because programming itself is actually a list of commands. I'm sure a lot of you know that, but some of you might not. A reductive system also deals with control. When you're a programmer, you really want your results to be predictable. You don't want things happening that are way outside the test or use case that you're actually going after. And you want to, as I mentioned before about a reductive system, you're breaking things down to eliminate any additional noise. And finally, when you've finally got everything broken down into this very discrete subject matter, you determine results with mathematics. Everything's in its own little box, and you can say 1 + 1 at that point, and it equals 4 or whatever. So the result of the old way is something that's known as a complicated system. So I use this picture as an example. That is a yes and no situation. Is the train going to go this way or the train going to go that way? And if you keep on layering these yes and no situations on top of each other, you can still decompose them if you have enough time. But it's so complicated, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to be able to do that. So what you end up with is a system that knows a lot of things, like Google knows a lot of things, but it understands absolutely nothing. When you're dealing with a constructive system, you start dealing with words like discovery. A discovery-based system, what you end up doing is you're actually programming a learning process instead of the knowledge that gets dumped into the computer. you're dealing with words like guide, the outcomes could be unpredictable, but they're actually markedly better. And we talked about maximizing your inputs, so more data the better when you're dealing with a constructive system. And the results are determined almost biologically, and I'll get into what I mean by that. Because when you're dealing with a bottom-up or constructive system, what you're dealing with is a complex system where it's very difficult to reduce. It's very difficult to find every single variable that exists. And what we're starting to do in AI right now is we're starting to mimic biological processes. The main one that I find the most interesting is the algorithms that focus on genetic programming. So when we talk about AI, AI is a blanket term that covers absolutely everything that's in my computer right now. Everything breaks down into a 0 and 1, and it stops becoming AI when it's something that is either a marketing person takes over and says, no, that's an operating system, or we start decomposing into things that are a little bit more understandable. So when we're dealing with artificial intelligence, there's all kinds of different artificial intelligence, but the artificial intelligence that I pay the most attention to is machine learning, and that's probably the biggest thing that's happening right now. And we did talk about a lot of these on the bottom here. We talked about a lot of these in today's talks, but the thing that's got everybody really excited is deep learning. And we actually did talk about reinforcement learning and other things that are also considered deep learning, but that's what's got everybody up and crazy right now. And why is that? Well, it's because what deep learning is really good at, and other computer systems and AI systems haven't been really good at, is figuring out what's important and what something's about. Previous traditional machine learning algorithms were scoring 89% on a test that it was given around what's important and what's it's about. But when the same test was given to a deep learning system, it came out with 99%. So taking this a little further, a little known secret about artificial intelligence is that most startups and established firms are pretty much using all of the same deep learning, machine learning, and AI. It's a lot of open source stuff. Google's got TensorFlow, Montreal's got Theano, Microsoft's got a cognitive toolkit, and if you go to that link right there on Wikipedia, there's like 10 other deep learning and machine learning algorithms that people are using. And what they're doing is they're actually just taking these different types of AI and stringing them together to be able to get to a result. So as a designer, when you're looking at, or a designer, as a product lead, when I'm looking at deep learning systems, I say, well, is it external deep learning? Meaning, is it an open source technology? And what usually, as a designer, what I look for, or my design team looks for, is experience with that deep learning algorithm and also the interaction that's associated with that deep learning algorithm. And when you come across somebody who's got homegrown, well, it's very technical, and I think you guys saw that from the previous talks, that deep learning and machine learning can get extremely technical very quickly. And if it's not an API, if it's not something that's coming from excuse me, let me back up. Experience interaction are very important also in homegrown DL if it's not an API. So here's where I kind of diverge into applications and use cases. What's important for design here is to learn to identify the implementation levels of AI technology. A lot of people will disagree with me with this definition, but I'm just doing this to illustrate here. An application that solves a technical problem and a use case that solves a business problem. I spend a lot of time walking down the middle of these two things here. So when we're dealing with applications, you have things like speech recognition, sorting and classifying documents, image recognition, Entity identification, prediction, and sentiment detection. Speech recognition is just like what it sounds like. It's being able to identify words, phrases, concepts within language. Sorting and classifying takes aspects of speech recognition and actually, in some cases doesn't, but puts things into piles. So if I was giving a stack of documents, I can tell the AI to easily break these down into different categories of what that document set could be about. Image detection, you heard in a previous talk about image detection, which is when I want to know when a cat is a cat and when it's not. Entity identification is person, place, or thing. I want to be able to extract out of a text body or a picture or something that's very unstructured, the entity that's associated with that. Prediction is, if I've seen 10 cats, what's the chance the next one's going to be a cat too? Or going 2 or 3 degrees of separation away from that and saying, well, I see a cat, and every time I see a cat, they're talking about food, so maybe they're also talking about cat food. Or being able to say cat, dog, and knowing that that's a pet. And then sentiment detection is, how am I feeling about something? Now, when we jump over to what a use case might be in image detection, it's taking one of those technologies and using it for things like melanoma detection, or looking at a picture of a car and having a deep learning or machine learning algorithm trained up to see if something might be fraud in a collision case. From a prediction perspective, this is actually something that I work on at my company, which is looking at the risk of lack of water in the Middle East and the rise of terrorism that's associated with it. So we've gotten to a point where we can actually predict when the threshold is that we can expect to see a terrorist organization rise in the Middle East based on their water tables. And here's another one that I work on at my company, which is determining banking compliance risk. And we're working with Capital One right now to determine, well, okay, if I see that a enforcement action, which is this bank broke the rules and the government's coming down on them hard, if I see that in a combination of 5 or 6 other concepts, when does it get to a point for my organization as Capital One that that's risky for me? When do I need to pay attention to my compliance risk? Okay, I'll jump over to my fun little designing for AI and robotics section. I like drawing these little lines and kind of like creating these upward and downward categories. And in this case, I say when I look at a design that's coming from my design team, I want to see if it elicits a positive feeling. Will it keep me coming back for more? And on a functional side, I don't want any surprises. I call them negative surprises. So when I look at the emotional side of things, I'm designing for future forward, meaning I want to make my users feel like they're on the cutting edge of something. I want it to be delightful. I want to make users happy and compelled to keep on using my application. There's a level of sophistication that's associated with the designs that I like to see. And they generally make a user feel like they're part of some exclusive club. And from an intuitive perspective, what I want to do is make users feel like the application is safe and it's familiar. So nothing like that picture of the dog with all the eyes coming out of its head. That was crazy. We do that with text. So if you can imagine what that must look like, ideas and concepts coming out like that, it's a trip. From a functional perspective, I'm going to use the same categories, but I'm going to say when I'm designing for future forward, I really want to make sure that my design is easy to update. When I'm designing, I want to think 10 steps ahead, and I want to be able to see a design that makes it easy to make changes in the future. From the delightful perspective, I want to see if my design team has put a level of incentives or rewards in place to stimulate the user to keep on using the application or move forward. From a sophisticated perspective, this is stylized fonts and lines in the application interface. So what I'm looking at here is, do I have the Tesla kind of lines that are going through the application? I'm a big fan of video games, and Destiny is one of my favorite games. I think the lines of that game are absolutely incredible. If you have not seen Destiny's design team, I recommend you go check them out. And from an intuitive perspective, I don't want to interrupt the flow of a user. I want them to continue to move through the workflow of the application and not get hit or pulled out of their creative flow or their workflow. Yes?
Okay, so can you give us an example of what it is that, is this a robot, like a physical robot, or is this an interface? What is it that?
This is both.
Okay, so that's what we're designing for.
Yes.
Define what a robot is.
I'm sorry?
Can you define what a robot is, like exactly what it is that you are doing to design?
Well, if we're going to come from a deep learning perspective, I'm sure you guys are kind of like familiar with the robot movement. The reason that robots move that way is because they are being told a bunch of rules. So rule number one is, well, let's take a look at both sides of the equation here. When you're dealing with a robot that needs to pick up a ball and drop it in a hole. Robot number one, you give it the command to go down, pick something up, move up a certain distance, move across a certain distance, and drop the ball into this hole. Whereas the other side of robotics, basically there'd be a whole bucket of balls, and the robot would lean down, pick one up, drop it, keep dropping it until it goes through the hole, and then the robot would realize that it's made a successful action. So over time, what happens is the robot actually optimizes itself for moving just like a human does. So when you'll get these clean lines of graceful locomotion that'll come out of a robot when you start using these deep learning algorithms, or as they advance more into a robotic situation. Does that make sense? So as I said in the beginning of the talk, I really don't like saying one thing is better than the other. I really try and live my life in a very balanced way, and I like to look at applications and designs in a very balanced way. So I like to see all of these things in designs that my team bring to me. The other thing is designers, and Andy's going to be doing a talk on one of these, and that's Destiny 2. I'm so excited. Knowing the trends in interaction. Augmented reality, I don't think I need to define, defining what all these are. Augmented reality is like virtual reality, but you can see the real world. Gaming interfaces, virtual reality interfaces, and here's one thing that we really didn't touch on. What we do at Sovereign is when the user gets data in front of them that they're interested in, they're allowed to signal on that data to say that data is important. And they also can signal on that data to say it's not important. And what's happening in our machine learning algorithms, in our deep learning algorithms, is we're feeding back on ourselves. We just keep on getting smarter and smarter about what that user likes and what they don't like. But there's an interface design that's associated with that. And the interface is basically a machine training interface. So looking at the ways that current people train these deep learning algorithms or machine learning algorithms using the supervised learning methods, they're kind of not fun, and they don't bring you along and make you feel like you're actually doing something with your data. Instead, it feels like a task or a chore. So the interfaces that we design actually, this part right here is what we're focusing on right now, this right-hand side. But those trends over there, I mean, we're talking about, behind the scenes, what we're talking about is having a PlayStation 4 in every business and having people actually step right into the middle of their data and play a game with actually bringing their data to the surface that's most important. So the don't fear Skynet part, we touched on actually quite a bit of this. As you heard me just talk about the machine training interfaces, I don't think that one is better than the other. I think that if we design to keep humans in the loop, humans are always going to be useful, because it's just the intelligence explosion is more about learning than it is about knowledge. This completely steps into another world that I live in, which is the world of self-improvement. Self-improvement. Seeing a machine learning algorithm actually get racist points me in the direction of saying that humans aren't ready for technology like this. And what we need to do as human beings is actually focus on improving ourselves, instead of trying to program into a machine what's good and what's bad. Because if we're teaching our machines, and anyone who has children in this room knows that, it is a combination of, rewards and punishment, but that little being is actually exploding in many, many different directions, and we use a different technique to be able to nurture that child as well as direct that child. So I see programming of the future as lesson planning instead of programming. So what are you going to teach your AI? Well, I studied ethics, I studied psychology, I am a healer. I would rather heal people than hurt people, so my AI is going to do the same thing. Interestingly enough, we're talking about controlling an AI. Nature actually has its own control mechanisms. And this is going to be a horrible example, but I'll use it anyways. Somebody goes cuckoo on a plane, 25 people jump him and bring him down. Somebody does a terrorist activity, governments look at that situation and try and contain that activity. As AI start moving into a more biological framework, the same thing's going to happen there, because they're using the same rules to evolve and emerge like we do, or they're going to start. They're actually with deep learning. That's the way we're moving right now. And there are tons of books that I have read on nature's control mechanisms, and if you're interested, I'll point you in the right direction after this. But even the brain itself, if one brain cell goes off and does something crazy, the rest of the brain cells kind of pull it in. And we also have medication for that. And because of all those things, and I think you heard a little whisper of this before, I think everybody in this room is going to decide humanity's future. I think design and designers, how we put AI forward to people and how they interact with them is going to control everything about how we are. So, yeah, self-improve, don't worry so much. Not to say everything's going to be great, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as everybody thinks it is. And that's pretty much it for me. Thanks for your attention. And does anybody have any questions for Crazy Michael?
Are you going to retweet that? Are you going to retweet your presentation?
Yeah, I'll give it to Andy and she'll put it up. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm off the hook. Oh, no, we got one question. Did you have a question? Oh, Andy's got questions. This is going to be fun.
What should designers, sorry, I did a question right there, but I'm gonna, what should designers focus on, in terms of, should they focus on predictive search, or how can they integrate AI into their practice?
Well, I'll tell you behind the scene, another behind the scenes kind of story about what Sovereign does. What we feel the trend is that getting access to data is becoming more and more democratized, meaning that there are systems that are bringing accessibility to everyone. And when you look at what Sovereign's doing is we have actually, when I talked about people take all those same AI programs and string them all together, we've actually done a decomposition of many, many different types of AI into operators. So we created this SQL language for unstructured data. So it depends on what the use case is. So,
Should designers use data for prototypes?
I'm sorry, Andy, I'm having trouble hearing you. So I went to a lot of fish shows, and I stood like right in the front row a lot, and you're very soft-spoken.
Okay, forget it. Now, Victor, you guys ask another question.
I
After saying it aloud, I realized that it didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I didn't really have a question. I didn't want you to leave because I am elaborating a question in my mind. But talking about self-improvement, I came to this presentation because it was saying, the future of our careers, and that kind of involved fear in losing part of, what do you do every day. Do you have something to say about that? Like, what to expect in our careers in the next 5 years?
Like, how do I focus on self-improvement? Is this like, are we going to Tony Robbins zone now? Well, no, I think that when you think of yourself as an agent, becoming the best, like me, myself, I focus on becoming the best Michael that I can be, kindness, all the things that they teach you in philosophy. But, we're moving through the universe at speeds that we can't even realize because we're sitting here, and it looks like nothing's moving really quickly right now. But as we're moving through this reality, I feel like we chop off pieces of ourselves to make ourselves a little more aerodynamic to reach goals quicker. And, my school of thought is at the core of that. I look at the former Michael, who was a Deloitte consultant, and pretty much rating absolutely everybody from a strategy and operations perspective, and wondering if that's good, if that's what I want to teach my AI. So I had a major kind of like, and my first child was born at the same time, so I had a major kind of like awakening that said, I don't want my kid to do this. As a leader, I don't want anyone that works for me to do this. Instead, I want them to focus on becoming the best people that they can be, and I want to create environments for them to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. And I do apologize. My little one kept me up until like midnight last night sick. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you guys for coming out tonight. If you